Commander Alice Miller stared at the holographic display, her face illuminated by the glowing red dots that represented the approaching alien fleet. The war room of Earth Defense Force headquarters had fallen silent as the scale of the threat became clear. "How many?" she finally asked, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Lieutenant Ryan Ellis swiped through several data screens before answering. "At least 200 capital ships, ma'am. Maybe more behind them. They're still coming through the jump point near Neptune." Alice nodded slowly. Humanity had only encountered 3 alien species before this, all peaceful. This was different. The unknown fleet had destroyed the research outpost on Triton without warning or communication. "Any response to our hails?" "Yes, Commander. Just now," said Communications Officer Wendy Park, putting it on screen. The holographic display shifted, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered alien with iridescent scales covering its face. Multiple eyes blinked independently at them as it began to speak, its words translated by the computer. "I am Supreme Commander Kraxus of the Vraxian Empire. Your species has been assessed and found inadequate for proper alliance status. You will surrender all military vessels, resources, and colonies. Resistance will result in your extinction. You have 12 Earth hours to comply." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the war room in stunned silence. General Sam Winters was the first to speak. "That's it then. We evacuate who we can and surrender the outer colonies." "Sir." Alice turned to face him, disbelief evident in her voice. "Be realistic, Miller. Did you see the size of that fleet? Our entire navy is barely 40 ships. We're outnumbered 5-1 at minimum." Alice stood her ground. "With respect, General, size isn't everything. Our ships are faster, more maneuverable, and will be blown to dust before they get within firing range," interrupted Admiral Kate Reeves. "I've run the simulations. Even with our new shield technology, we can't win a direct confrontation." The argument continued around the table, voices growing louder as the debate heated up. Alice waited for a break in the conversation before speaking again. "Permission to send a scouting party, sir. The Merlin and 2 escorts. We can gather better intelligence on their capabilities." General Winters hesitated, then nodded. "Granted, but no engagement, Miller. Strictly observation." 6 hours later, Alice stood on the bridge of the EDF Merlin, watching as her small squadron approached the massive alien armada. Though tiny compared to the Vraxian vessels, Earth ships were sleek and agile, packed with the best technology humanity could devise. "They've spotted us," reported Sensor Officer Pete Garcia. "They're hailing." The alien face appeared again, but this time it was a different Vraxian, with darker scales and a jagged scar across one eye. "Human vessels, this is Commander Zeth. You are witnessing the might of the Vraxian Empire. Your pitiful fleet amuses us. Such tiny ships for such a prideful species." Alice leaned forward. "This is Commander Miller of Earth Defense Force. We are here to establish diplomatic communications." The alien made a sound that the translator identified as laughter. "Diplomacy. With inferiors. Your entire fleet would fit inside one of our carrier bays. Return to your leaders with our message. Surrender or die." As the transmission ended, Alice noticed something. The Vraxian ships, while enormous, moved slowly as they changed formation. Their weapons systems seemed to require significant time to reorient. "Garcia, full sensor sweep. I want to know everything about those ships. Hull composition, energy signatures, blind spots, everything." "Yes, Commander." Alice turned to her executive officer, Jacob Lee. "They think size gives them the advantage. They're mocking us because our ships are small." Jacob nodded grimly. "They don't know humans very well, do they?" "No," Alice replied, a determined smile forming on her lips. "And that might just save us all." As the Merlin gathered data, Alice began forming a plan. The Vraxians had made a critical mistake in their arrogance. They had revealed themselves too soon, given Earth time to prepare. And they had underestimated humanity's greatest strength, the ability to overcome impossible odds. Admiral Frank Powell hadn't slept in 36 hours. The call to return from retirement had come as the Vraxian fleet entered the solar system, and he'd been working ever since. His weathered face showed every one of his 63 years as he studied the battle plans spread across the command table. "They're expecting us to either surrender or mount a desperate defense," he said, pointing to the projected path of the alien armada. "Either way, they think they know exactly what we'll do." Commander Alice Miller nodded. She had returned from her scouting mission with valuable data that confirmed her suspicions about the Vraxian ships. "They're massive, but slow to maneuver," she explained. "Their weapon systems take nearly 40 seconds to recharge between firing sequences. That's our window." The door to the war room slid open, and 2 civilians walked in. The woman was tall with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, while the man wore thick glasses and carried a tablet computer. "Admiral Powell, this is Dr. Olivia Carter and Engineer Daniel Wright from the Singularity Project," introduced General Winters. Powell raised an eyebrow. "The experimental ships. I thought they weren't ready for deployment." "They weren't supposed to be," Olivia replied, sliding her access card into the table's console. A holographic display appeared, showing 5 sleek vessels unlike anything in Earth's current fleet. But circumstances have changed. Daniel adjusted his glasses nervously. "The Singularity-class vessels are 1/8 the size of our standard destroyers, but they pack twice the firepower and 3 times the maneuverability." "How is that possible?" asked Alice, leaning forward to examine the schematics. "Quantum foam propulsion," Olivia said with undisguised pride. "The ships can essentially skip through the fabric of space-time in micro-jumps. To an observer, they'll appear to teleport short distances." Admiral Powell stroked his chin thoughtfully. "And weapons?" Daniel tapped his tablet, changing the display. "Particle lances that bypass conventional shields. The Vraxians won't know what hit them." 5 ships won't be enough," General Winters pointed out. "No," Powell agreed, "but they don't need to be. These Singularity ships will be our spear tip. The rest of the fleet will use hit-and-run tactics." He turned to face the others. "The Vraxians expect a conventional battle or no battle at all. We'll give them neither." As the meeting continued, word came that the Vraxian fleet had sent another message. The alien commander's face filled the main screen, its multiple eyes blinking in what appeared to be amusement. "Your scout ships fled like prey animals." The translator rendered its speech. "We expected more courage from a spacefaring species. Perhaps you are not worth conquering after all." Powell stepped forward. "This is Admiral Frank Powell of Earth Defense Force. We did not flee. We simply saw no reason to engage at that time." The alien made that strange laughing sound again. "Your tiny fleet cannot hope to stand against us. Each of your vessels is but an insect compared to our war cruisers." "Size isn't everything," Powell replied calmly. "So say all inferior species before their extinction," the Vraxian commander responded. "We will begin our assault on your Mars colony in 48 hours. Surrender before then, or witness the first step in your species' eradication." After the transmission ended, Alice turned to Powell. "They're so confident." "Overconfident," Powell corrected. "And that's exactly what we need." In the shipyards orbiting Earth, crews worked around the clock to prepare the fleet. The 5 Singularity vessels were moved to a secure hangar for final modifications, while the rest of Earth's ships received upgraded weapon systems based on Alice's sensor data. As Powell watched the bustling activity from an observation deck, he smiled grimly. The Vraxians thought they were facing a primitive, outmatched opponent. They mocked Earth's tiny fleet without understanding what those ships could do. Soon, they would learn just how dangerous humans could be when backed into a corner. The mining colony on Europa buzzed with activity as workers rushed to evacuate. Alarms blared throughout the underground complex, warning of approaching Vraxian vessels. Despite the evacuation order, nearly 30% of the colonists remained, still gathering essential equipment and research data. Colony Director Susan Ward watched the sensor feeds with growing anxiety. How long until they're in range? 15 minutes, her security chief replied. The transport ships can only take 50 more people. We won't get everyone out in time. Susan was about to respond when a new alert sounded. 3 Earth Defense Force ships had appeared near Jupiter's orbit, on an intercept course with the Vraxian scouts. Commander Alice Miller stood on the bridge of the EDF Falcon, the smallest of Earth's 3 vessels sent to defend Europa. Beside her, the Osprey and the Kestrel moved into formation. All 3 ships together were barely the size of a single Vraxian cruiser, but Alice knew they had advantages the aliens couldn't see. 7 Vraxian ships approaching, reported Lieutenant Ryan Ellis. They've spotted us. Good, Alice replied. Open a channel. The alien commander appeared on screen, its scales shimmering with indignation. Human vessels, you dare to challenge us. Your tiny ships are no match for even our scout force. Alice smiled politely. We're giving you one chance to leave this colony in peace. The Vraxians' multiple eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture the translation software identified as mockery. Your bravery is noted, but misplaced. We will destroy your insect-sized vessels, and then claim this moon as our first conquest. Then you leave us no choice, Alice said, closing the channel. She turned to her crew. Battle stations. Implement Powell's strategy. The 3 Earth ships spread out, appearing to present easy targets. The Vraxians fell for the bait, splitting their formation to pursue each human vessel separately. They're firing, called out Weapons Officer Ben Harris. Adaptive shields online, responded Ellis. As the Vraxian energy beams struck the Falcon, something unexpected happened. Instead of absorbing or deflecting the attack, the shield technology redirected it, sending the energy harmlessly into space. Did you see that? Alice heard a Vraxian crew member shout on the open channel they'd hacked. Their shields bent our weapon fire. The commander's voice followed. Impossible. Fire again. Alice didn't wait for their second attack. Execute Maneuver Delta. Now. The Falcon surged forward with startling speed, then seemed to vanish momentarily before reappearing behind the lead Vraxian vessel. The stolen sensor data had revealed a critical weakness. The alien shields were strongest at the front but weaker at the engine section. Target their propulsion systems, Alice ordered. Particle lances, full power. The lance weapons fired, blue-white energy slicing through the Vraxian ship's rear shields and cutting deep into its engines. The massive vessel went dark, tumbling helplessly in space. Across the battlefield, the Osprey and Kestrel performed similar maneuvers, using their superior speed and the element of surprise to devastating effect. Within minutes, 3 Vraxian ships were disabled, 2 were retreating, and 1 had been abandoned by its crew. The 7th ship, containing the Vraxian commander, attempted to flee but found itself surrounded. Surrender or be destroyed. Alice transmitted. Those are your only options. The alien's face appeared once more on screen, its expression unreadable to human eyes, but its voice translator conveying shock. How did primitives like you defeat our superior technology? You judged us by our size. Alice replied. That was your first mistake. Later, as Earth forces secured the captured Vraxian vessels, and Europa's evacuation continued as a precaution, Alice received a transmission from Admiral Powell. Outstanding work, Commander. The Vraxian prisoner is already providing valuable intelligence. Alice nodded. They're still underestimating us, sir. Their commander couldn't believe they were defeated by primitives in tiny ships. Good, Powell said, his face grim but satisfied. Let them keep underestimating us. It won't be the last time their arrogance costs them. Throughout the human colonies, news of the victory spread rapidly. A small Earth force had defeated a technologically advanced alien fleet. Hope began to replace fear, and for the first time since the Vraxian arrival. Humanity believed they might survive. Supreme Commander Gary paced the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion. Though his translator rendered his name as Gary to human ears, among his own kind his full title contained 14 syllables that signified his noble lineage and battle honors. None of that mattered now. He had been humiliated. 7 scout ships, he hissed, his scales darkening with rage. 7 ships lost to 3 human vessels 1/10 our size. His second in command, Vrex, stood at attention, trying not to provoke further anger. The prisoners have been interrogated, Supreme Commander. The humans have developed shield technology we have not encountered before. And their propulsion systems. I don't want excuses. Gary slammed his 4-fingered hand onto the command console. I want results. The High Council is watching this conquest. If we fail against such primitive opponents, our houses will lose standing for generations. Gary studied the tactical display, showing the human colony on Mars. It was their largest off-world settlement, home to over 2 million colonists. Taking it would deliver a devastating blow to human morale. Prepare half the fleet, he ordered. We will make an example of Mars that the humans will never forget. On Earth, Admiral Powell had anticipated this move. He sat in a secure bunker beneath the lunar surface, surrounded by holographic displays showing ship positions throughout the solar system. He's taking the bait, Powell said, nodding to Commander Alice Miller. The Vraxian fleet is mobilizing toward Mars, just as we predicted. Alice studied the deployment pattern. That's at least 100 capital ships. Even with our advantages, we can't defeat a force that size directly. We won't have to, Powell replied, gesturing to a section of space near Saturn. The rings provide perfect cover for our ambush. The ice particles will mask our ship's energy signatures until it's too late. In a laboratory at Earth Defense Headquarters, Dr. Maria Jackson worked frantically to complete the final adjustments on the quantum displacement torpedoes. These revolutionary weapons could teleport sections of enemy ships into empty space, essentially cutting them apart without explosions. The targeting system is still glitchy, she told her assistant as they ran another simulation. If we're off by even 2 meters, the torpedo could displace our own ships instead. Dr. Jackson, a voice called from the doorway. President Laura Wilson herself had arrived to check on their progress. Maria straightened up, surprised by the president's appearance. Madam President, we're nearly ready. Another 12 hours and... We don't have 12 hours, President Wilson interrupted. The Vraxians have accelerated their timetable. They'll reach Mars in less than 6 hours. Maria felt her stomach tighten. The torpedoes aren't ready for deployment. We need more time for testing. There is no more time, the president said firmly. Every simulation shows that without these weapons, we'll lose Mars and possibly Earth itself. I need you to finish what you can and prepare for immediate deployment. As Maria returned to her work with renewed urgency, an emergency meeting of Earth's Leadership Council was taking place. The debate had grown heated. We should negotiate, urged the Foreign Affairs Minister. Offer them the outer colonies in exchange for Earth's safety. Appeasement never works, countered the Defense Minister. They'll take what we offer, then come for the rest. President Wilson listened to both sides before speaking. Admiral Powell's strategy is risky, but it's our best option. The Vraxians have shown they won't accept anything less than our complete surrender. And if we fail? Someone asked. Then we fail fighting, Wilson answered simply. In space, the massive Vraxian fleet moved toward Mars, broadcasting threats across all frequencies to demoralize the colonists. Their messages mocked humanity's primitive technology and laughable defenses. Your tiny ships will be crushed like insects, Supreme Commander Gary announced. Mars will burn as a testament to the futility of resistance. Hidden in Saturn's rings, Earth's ships waited silently. Powell had positioned them carefully, using the planet's magnetic field and the ice particles to mask their presence. Each captain knew the plan was dangerous, with minimal margin for error. The fate of humanity would be decided in the next few hours, and everything depended on the Vraxians continuing to underestimate their supposedly inferior opponents. The sky above Mars turned ominous as the Vraxian fleet arrived. From the surface, colonists watched in horror as the massive alien ships eclipsed the sun, casting dark shadows across the red landscape. The Martian Defense Force consisted of just 12 Earth vessels and a handful of orbital platforms, seemingly insignificant against the 100 Vraxian warships now taking position around the planet. All civilians to emergency shelters, ordered Governor Rick Daniels from the colony's command center. This is not a drill. In orbit, Commander Alice Miller sat in the captain's chair of the EDF Falcon, her hands steady despite the overwhelming odds. Her ship and the 11 others formed a protective ring around Mars, looking like toys compared to the enormous alien vessels. "They're hailing us," Lieutenant Ellis reported. Supreme Commander Gary's face appeared on screen. "Your pathetic defense amuses us, humans. Surrender now, and we will spare the lives of your colonists." "We respectfully decline," Alice replied calmly. Gary's scales rippled with anger. "Then watch as your ships are obliterated." The first Vraxian attack came like a storm. Energy weapons lashed out from multiple ships simultaneously, overwhelming the defenses of 2 Earth vessels. They exploded in silent bursts of light and debris. "Evasive pattern Omega," Alice ordered. Her ship narrowly avoided a similar fate, ducking beneath the beam of a Vraxian dreadnought. The remaining Earth vessels scattered, using Mars' thin atmosphere to mask their movements. They struck back with precision, targeting weak points identified from their earlier encounters. 3 Vraxian ships suffered damage, but it wasn't enough to turn the tide. "We've lost the Phoenix and the Eagle," Ellis reported grimly. "The Hawk is critically damaged." Alice opened a secure channel to Admiral Powell. "Sir, we can't hold them much longer." Powell's voice came through, calm and assured. "Just 3 more minutes, Commander. Keep them focused on Mars." In the hidden reaches of Saturn's rings, Powell gave the order. "All ships, execute jump now." 30 Earth vessels, including all 5 Singularity-class ships, emerged from their hiding places. They accelerated to attack speed, heading directly toward Mars. Powell had positioned his forces perfectly. They would arrive behind the Vraxian fleet, catching them in a devastating crossfire. Back at Mars, the battle continued to go poorly for the defenders. Alice's ship took a glancing blow that disabled their main weapons array. 2 more Earth vessels were destroyed, their crews lost. Supreme Commander Gary watched with satisfaction. "See how easily they fall. Their tiny ships are no match for our might." Then a lieutenant called out urgently. "Supreme Commander, new contacts detected. Multiple human vessels approaching from Sector 7. "Impossible," Gary hissed. "Where did they come from?" The answer came in the form of Powell's fleet, dropping out of hyperspace directly behind the Vraxian position. Without hesitation, they launched their first volley of quantum displacement torpedoes. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Where the torpedoes struck, sections of Vraxian ships simply vanished, leaving clean-cut gaps in their hulls. Air, crew, and equipment spilled into space. One dreadnought was cut nearly in half, its power core destabilizing before it exploded in a massive fireball. "What is this sorcery?" Gary demanded as his tactical display showed 3 more capital ships critically damaged. The human ships moved with incredible speed, darting between the much larger Vraxian vessels. The 5 Singularity-class ships were nearly impossible to target, seeming to blink in and out of existence as they used their quantum foam propulsion to make micro-jumps around the battlefield. Alice saw her opportunity. With the Vraxians distracted by Powell's surprise attack, she ordered her remaining ships to regroup and target the enemy's command vessels. "Use Mars gravity to slingshot around," she instructed. "Target their communication arrays first." The human pilots demonstrated superior tactics, using the planet's gravity well to accelerate beyond what their engines alone could achieve. They executed high-risk maneuvers that the larger, slower Vraxian ships couldn't match. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed victory was within reach. 7 Vraxian capital ships had been destroyed or disabled, and many more were damaged. The quantum torpedoes had proven even more effective than hoped. Then, the sensors detected a new wave of energy signatures. The rest of the Vraxian fleet had arrived. Another 100 ships joining the battle. All vessels, Powell transmitted, prepare for Phase 2. The arrival of Vraxian reinforcements changed the battlefield in an instant. The initial momentum of Earth's surprise attack faltered as fresh enemy ships poured into the combat zone, their weapons at full charge. Evasive maneuvers, Admiral Powell ordered, but it was too late for some. 3 Earth vessels were caught in crossing energy beams, vaporizing them instantly. On the bridge of the Falcon, Commander Alice Miller fought to keep her damaged ship operational. A direct hit had knocked out their main power, leaving them drifting and vulnerable. Emergency systems provided minimal life support and communications, but weapons and engines remained offline. Reroute all auxiliary power to shields, she ordered, watching helplessly as the battle turned against them. Through the viewport, she saw 2 more Earth ships explode under concentrated Vraxian fire. "Commander," Lieutenant Ellis called out, his voice strained. "The Vraxians are targeting us specifically. 3 cruisers on approach." Alice understood why. They recognized her ship from the previous encounter. The Vraxians wanted revenge for their earlier humiliation. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Olivia Carter worked frantically to restore power. Sparks flew from damaged conduits as she and her team attempted repairs. "The main reactor coupling is fried," reported her assistant. "We can't get propulsion back online." Olivia stared at the pulsing core of the ship's quantum reactor. An idea formed, desperate and probably suicidal, but possibly their only option. "Everyone out," she ordered suddenly. "Mom, I said everyone out. Get to the escape pods now." As her team evacuated, Olivia opened a channel to the bridge. "Commander, I have a plan. It's risky, but it might create an opening." On the bridge, Alice listened to Olivia's proposal. Her face paled. "That's essentially a suicide mission, Chief." "Not necessarily," Olivia replied. "If I time it right, I can trigger the overload, then reach the escape pod before detonation. But you need to get everyone else off the ship now." Alice hesitated only briefly. "Do it. We'll begin evacuation." As crew members rushed to escape pods, Olivia worked to modify the reactor. By creating a controlled overload, she could generate an electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to temporarily disable any Vraxian ships within a certain radius. The trick was setting the timer to give herself enough time to escape. 90 seconds to reactor critical, she reported, finishing the final bypass. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked, knowing any mistake meant instant death. With the last modification complete, Olivia sprinted for the nearest escape pod. The ship shuddered around her as another Vraxian attack struck their weakened shields. In orbit around Mars, Admiral Powell watched with growing concern as more Earth ships were lost. His tactical advantage was disappearing rapidly under the overwhelming Vraxian numbers. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "Commander Miller reports they're abandoning the Falcon. Some kind of planned reactor overload." Powell understood immediately. "All vessels within 2,000 kilometers of the Falcon, pull back now." The Vraxians, noticing the retreating Earth ships and the evacuation pods, moved in closer to the seemingly helpless Falcon. Supreme Commander Gary sensed an opportunity to destroy a symbolic target. "Capture that vessel," he ordered. "I want its technology intact." 3 massive Vraxian cruisers surrounded the Falcon, preparing to deploy boarding parties. They didn't notice the rapidly increasing energy readings from the ship's reactor. Inside the final escape pod, Olivia strapped herself in. Reactor critical in 5, 4, 3. The explosion never came. Instead, the Falcon's reactor released its energy in the form of a massive electromagnetic pulse. The invisible wave washed over the nearby Vraxian ships, shorting out their systems and leaving them temporarily dead in space. "Now," Powell shouted, seeing the opening. "All remaining ships, form up and execute swarm protocol." The Earth fleet, reduced to less than half its original number, reorganized into a tight formation. The Vraxians mockingly called it a human swarm, as the ships moved together in what seemed like a primitive, desperate tactic. But as the swarm approached the disabled Vraxian vessels, it demonstrated a level of coordination the aliens had never seen. The Earth ships moved in perfect synchronization, like a single organism with many parts. They targeted the same weak points simultaneously, multiplying their effectiveness. Supreme Commander Gary watched in growing horror as ship after ship fell to the swarm. His own flagship systems were just coming back online when he realized that the primitive humans had outmaneuvered him completely. "Impossible," he whispered, seeing the tide of battle shift once again. The Vraxian flagship Dominion drifted helplessly as Earth's swarm formation surrounded it. Supreme Commander Gary stood on his bridge, multiple eyes blinking rapidly in what his species recognized as extreme distress. His mighty fleet, once numbering 200 vessels, had been reduced to less than 80 operational ships, with many more damaged or disabled. "Send the signal," Gary finally ordered, his voice translator unable to hide the defeat in his tone. Across the battlefield, Earth vessels received the Vraxian surrender transmission. Admiral Powell acknowledged it from his command ship, then directed the human fleet to maintain combat readiness. "They could be stalling," he cautioned. "Keep weapons hot until boarding parties secure their command centers." In a rescue shuttle near Mars, Commander Alice Miller watched the developments with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. Beside her sat Chief Engineer Olivia Carter, miraculously alive after her daring escape from the Falcon. "I didn't think we'd actually win," Olivia admitted, staring out at the battlefield where debris from both fleets floated silently in space. Alice nodded. "Neither did they. That was their fatal mistake." Within hours, Earth Marines had boarded and secured the Vraxian flagship. Supreme Commander Gary was escorted under guard to a secure communication room, where Earth's leadership waited via holographic projection. President Laura Wilson spoke first. "Supreme Commander, your unconditional surrender has been accepted. Your remaining ships will power down weapons and prepare for Earth inspection teams." Gary's scales had dulled from their usual bright color, a sign of shame in his culture. "How?" he asked simply. "How did your tiny fleet defy our armada? It defies all logical analysis." Admiral Powell stepped forward. "You judged us by our size and assumed superiority. You broadcast your intentions, giving us time to prepare. You separated your forces, allowing us to defeat them piecemeal. But most importantly," Alice added, joining the conversation from her shuttle, "you mocked us. You called our ships tiny and primitive, never considering that we might have designed them that way for a reason." News of the victory spread rapidly across Earth and its colonies. Celebrations erupted as humanity realized they had successfully defended their world against overwhelming odds. The Vraxian threat, which had seemed unstoppable just days earlier, had been decisively defeated. In the weeks that followed, delegations from 3 other alien civilizations arrived in the Sol system. They had been watching the conflict closely, having themselves lived under Vraxian domination or threat for centuries. "We did not think it possible," admitted the ambassador from the Trellan Collective, a peaceful species that had paid tribute to the Vraxians for generations. "No one has ever defeated them in open warfare. Humans specialize in doing the impossible," President Wilson replied with a smile. "The technology developed during the conflict transformed humanity's position in the galaxy. The quantum displacement torpedoes, adaptive shields, and Singularity-class vessels became the foundation for a new generation of ships. Earth established diplomatic relations with dozens of species who had previously feared making contact while the Vraxians dominated local space. 1 month after the Battle of Mars, a memorial ceremony was held for those who had given their lives in defense of Earth. Admiral Powell and Commander Miller stood together at the unveiling of a monument constructed from the recovered hull fragments of Earth and Vraxian ships, fused together into a spiral reaching toward the stars. "We lost good people," Alice said quietly, remembering the crews who hadn't survived. Powell nodded solemnly. "Yes, but because of their sacrifice, billions will live free from fear." The memorial plaque read, "Size isn't everything. Humanity's greatest strength has always been our ability to overcome impossible odds." In a secure facility near Earth's moon, Supreme Commander Gary sat in comfortable but secure quarters. He had requested to learn more about human history, trying to understand how such a young species had accomplished the impossible. As he read accounts of human wars, innovations, and perseverance, Gary began to understand his critical error. He had mistaken physical size for strength, technological advancement for superiority. The humans had turned his mockery of their tiny fleet into motivation, his arrogance into vulnerability. In the end, Gary realized a truth his species had never considered. Sometimes, the smallest opponents are the most dangerous of all.